past in Britain.
We need not lose our identity completely.
Time after time I warned them of the dangers ahead.
Which I know very well, so I've lived in London most of my grown-up life.
And I think he should apologise.
I don't want that. Do you?
I wish they'd get out of my way.
Refreshment from start to finish.
14 prime ministers have held office during her reign. Tradition demands that once a week they report to Her Majesty at Buckingham Palace.
All of them come to find it one of the most treasured moments of the week.
On the 12th of May 1937, George VI is crowned King Emperor of 570 million people. The spirit of empire is reinforced. Each year, on the anniversary of Queen Victoria's birthday, Britain and her colonies celebrate Empire Day.
Stand your feet and give 3 cheers. Get free meat and get free beers.
Instead, the residents here now live in fear. Crime has become commonplace, with muggings, shootings and houses being burnt down by teenage gangs.
Robbing bikes, robbing motorbikes, robbing cars, people getting shot. If we see any gangs, we don't even go by them, we just walk off. Only if it's our own gang.
Just like in case it's pedo or something like that.
Since 1840, the Amabulu, the white South Africans, like their American counterparts, have had no right of return to Europe. They're in Africa to stay. They are today of Africa. Africa is in their blood, and they have fought imperial colonialism in a number of wars until their women and children were thrown in concentration camps. Today, they are threatened with extinction by a communist-run governing party, the ANC, that is fated by the formal Western media that appears to relish in the suffering and tribulations of the white people of South Africa.
In the British Empire, we have suffered together and we shall conquer together.
No doubt you have heard of our rationing here. We get half a pound of sugar and 4 ounces of coffee per week. That's cutting it pretty stiff, but if the folks in Britain can survive and still smile, why can't we? Keep the old spirit soaring.
Is this fun, is it? Is this fun?
It had all started in Tottenham, North London.
The rumours of the death of globalisation are actually greatly exaggerated. A lot of the indicators of globalisation are at high watermarks.
What began as a peaceful protest quickly turned into civil unrest. Crowds of people stormed their own communities. Looters helped themselves to everything and anything they could get their hands on. And in the first riots organised on social media, the police struggled to reclaim control.
The story starts, like all good villain narrative arcs, in the City of London.
It's often said she's never put a foot wrong, and that is true.
I don't like empire and what it signifies. The coloured peoples have been exploited by us as a means of profit. And by doing so, unemployment and poor living has been created at home. I don't mind British Commonwealth, but definitely not empire.
Thousands of people on the street. People from all over Hackney on the street. Like, it was insane. The atmosphere was like, we need to send out a message. We need to be heard, because silence is not working anymore. Talking is not working anymore. No, it's not like he wanted the police to get hurt, like, but it was like, you lot need to listen. Something needs to change.
The Queen has already met 14 prime ministers. The first was Winston Churchill.
We must strive to give everybody greater security against poverty, unemployment, sickness, and old age. Above all, we must tackle the housing problem.
Winston Churchill, her paternal friend.
Anthony Eden leaves the palace not only as Britain's Prime Minister, but as the man who has dedicated his life to peace. Born at Windleston Hall near Bishop Auckland, he went to Eton and later achieved a distinguished war record, winning the Military Cross.
The simple ceremony, surrounded by flowers from Mr. Churchill's Westrom garden, is over, and down the red carpet come Mr. and Mrs. Eden. Cameras flash again, and a woman in the crowd presses a silver horseshoe from her own wedding cake into the groom's hand and sums up all our wishes.
After the war, Europe was in a state of uncertainty. Anthony Eden entered the Foreign Office in 1926, attended the League of Nations debates, and made several visits to Berlin with Sir John Simon, the then Foreign Secretary. Sir Anthony travelled 16,000 miles in a little over a fortnight. In Europe, events were marching towards the ultimate conflict. Germany broke the Locarno Treaty.
But you know, these meetings, apart from the value of the actual formal discussion, are very valuable because of the opportunities they give for informal discussions between the ministers who are there. For instance, I look forward to conversations on many topics with my United States colleague, Mr. Foster Dulles, the American Secretary of State, who will be in Paris now, with whom I've worked together on many occasions. It is really extremely helpful to us to have this chance of reviewing quietly together in the hours when the formal conferences are not meeting the many problems which still face this troubled world.
Yet his unparalleled experience at the Foreign Office gives him a masterful insight into world affairs.
But words have been enough. What we did do was to take police action at once. Action to end the fighting and to separate the armies. We acted swiftly and reported to the Security Council, and I believe that before long it will become apparent to everybody that we acted rightly and wisely.
It was announced from Buckingham Palace that the resignation of Sir Anthony Eden as Prime Minister had been accepted, and a statement from Number 10 gave ill health as the reason.
Everywhere this will be hailed as a great victory for Signor Mussolini. And throughout the world it will be said that this country has surrendered to the demands of a dictator. They are not prepared to stand for the League of Nations. They are not prepared to stand for democracy. They are prepared to make any kind of deal with the dictatorship powers. There will be no longer in this country a government which is prepared to stand up for international law and right, but a government that is prepared to enter into any kind of a deal with aggressive fascist powers. This policy is not a policy that will lead to peace. It will not lead to a settlement of the affairs of Europe. It is essentially a war policy, and it aligns this country with the reactionary forces of the world. The repercussions of this event will be widespread in the dominions, in the colonies, and throughout the world. It is most noticeable that everywhere the enemies of peace and democracy are rejoicing, the friends of this country are depressed.
Particularly close was her relationship with Prime Minister number 5, the Labour lefty Harold Wilson.
But I just haven't had time to think about that side of it. Of course, it is a very great honour, but I think the important thing is to get on with the job and to do it properly. Well, of course, it's not for me to say how I think the long skirts or the short skirts look, though, of course, I have my own private opinions on the matter. I think at this time of shortage of materials and of manpower, most people would agree that it just doesn't make sense to have the skirts longer than they have been. And if people are going to make the skirts longer, then there'll just be fewer of them. And of course, the longer the skirts are, the fewer there will be of them.
Labour lefty Harold Wilson.
Edward Heath.
I've always wanted to find out for myself all through my life what was really going on.
The rather lightweight figure who dutifully followed the Tory line changed. He visited Nazi Germany and went to Hitler's showpiece and Nuremberg rally.
And I must say, being here brings back these extraordinary memories to me of this. Makes one realise now exactly how big an enterprise it was.
Can we have a seat? Oh, right in tune, you see.
It was a blaze of colour, flags flying everywhere, uniforms, bands, and the whole place was alive with the power of Nazism. Hitler was up there in the podium after he arrived, and I was sitting very close on these steps to him. Because the impact it made on me was, look, this is an absolutely major threat. Look how well organized it is. Look how he got all of these people absolutely under his command.
On his return, Heath led the student opposition to the Tory government's policy of appeasing the Nazis. He gained all-party support and was elected president of the Union. The Union is proud of having produced 5 prime ministers and many more cabinet ministers in its 175 years.
I always think its real joy is in its soft stops, and these really are quite lovely. Let me show you what some of them are like. You take the swell organ.
At the end of the 70s, the first female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady.
I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap was that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, so long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
Gentlemen, as the Lord President has chosen to come to Cabinet unprepared, I shall have to close the meeting. Good morning.
The first female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. Equally difficult was her relationship with Tony Blair.
We are witnessing now the nemesis of our own imperialism. It always seemed to me that the empire should be an object of shame rather than pride.
Tony Blair.
There is an anger and discontent, and it's about the pace and the scale and the speed of change. And people feel insecure, and they're looking for someone to express their anger, their discontent, to articulate their grievances. So in America, they turn to Donald Trump. In France, they turn to someone completely different, Emmanuel Macron. In Britain, it's unclear what's going to happen, but clearly there's a lot of dissent, and the centre ground has actually folded. It's weak, and it's not able to answer the questions. But I've had to look at that decision again.
Because you voted for the Iraq War.
Yes, of course.
Right. I mean, and in the book, you make it clear that you
I
thought
think we made a mistake.
Will you make it clear you don't think you got enough information?
No,
the Americans withheld information.
I think the Americans knew that he didn't have these weapons. Certainly in the Pentagon, they knew. And now when I look at the American evidence, they didn't worry that he didn't have weapons. They were going to go for him anyway.
They were into regime change.
They wanted the regime to change and Saddam out.
Many people think that. I think you got a bad rap when you were Prime Minister, never got the chance to show us really what you could do. You're still a young guy.
Yeah,
I'm
younger than Mr. Trump.
Right. You're way younger than Trump.
See how they treat the Muslims, you know?
Back to the present. The royal audience is over.
Rishi Sunak is the man most likely to be our next Prime Minister.
70% of the top 100 economies in the world in terms of revenues are now multinationals, not countries. Cross-country spillover effects mean that you can no longer take regional indices at face value.
He's gone from being one of the most popular chancellors in living memory to radicalising money-saving expert Martin Lewis.
Cross-border investment stocks have risen from the 20% in the 1830s to over 30% in the 1950s to over 400% of GDP today.
Despite the public facing the largest tax burden for close to 100 years. While people confront the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, the UK is the only major economy actually increasing the tax burden on its citizens. For years, Rishi Sunak got to play politics on easy mode. The man responsible for dealing with the cost of living crisis is taking a well-deserved break. He's suffering a public wrath usually reserved for Love Island contestants.
Global supply chains account for nearly 80% of global trade and 1 out of every 5 jobs.
A year ago, his record on anti-Semitism overshadowed the election campaign.
And yet, he's become a byword for Tory cruelty.
Is this your first time here?
No, it's my third time.
Yeah, but this happens all the time. It doesn't really matter.
But it shouldn't happen. It's injustice.
Only happens with Muslims, yeah? Really. Only if it's Muslim, yeah? They will happen. It's like a drama. This happens every week. It's a show.
It shouldn't be like this.
It's a show. Everyone just comes in just to argue and fight. And then they just do this.
And how flows of financial capital, human capital, technological capital, digital information flows are really going to be driving and powering the global economy.
This exposes the hollowness at the heart of Fishy Rishi's brand. You won't find much about this on Rishi Sunak's website, dear reader, but after stints at 40 grand a year Winchester College, Oxford and then Goldman Sachs, the Chancellor worked at TCI. TCI is a hedge fund that played a significant role in the collapse of RBS. I won't get into the details. I'll just encourage you to revisit Margot Robbie's bath scene in The Big Short.
This is where I was standing when they burnt the place down. It was just over there. That's where the window was that was broken, where the first puff of smoke came out.
I was still young and impressionable. I don't know how you thought that was the solution to the problem.
The spasm of violence and looting died away almost as quickly as it had started. 10 years on, some of the victims and the perpetrators are still counting the cost of one of the most violent inner-city eruptions of modern times.
The flows in capital, in digital information, in human talent working across borders through supply chains are at higher points than they've ever been in human history. As we explore in our new paper, The End of Sovereignty, it is really quite remarkable how strong globalization is in many areas and how it will profoundly affect investment outcomes.
And the first thing to learn is the epic history of this much tormented country. And the last place on earth from which to learn any fact is the formal US media.
What kind of country?
Refreshment from start to finish.
The finding of truth.
If you want to change something, you have to be a part of something. You have to get involved, you have to educate yourself on it, and you have to make a change from inside. It's all good and well having opinions saying no one listens, but if you're not there to be listened to, who's going to listen?